HR and GDPR are the two most important regulations for any business. One deals with people, while the other deals with data about those people. And therefore, they collide at every turn. Hence the reason for When HR Meets GDPR LinkedIn Live series. Hope you enjoy it. Please remember to subscribe and give it a thumbs up. Hello everyone, and welcome to the fifth of our When HR Meets GDPR sessions. Today we're going to be talking about business continuity. For those of you that know us, you know that Julie and I strongly believe in generating awareness and educating business owners, in particular small business owners, both in HR and in GDPR topics, which, because of their natures, they do touch each other at every point, really. And so that's the reason why Julie and I collaborate on these LinkedIn Live sessions. Please use the comments on the LinkedIn post to submit your questions, which we welcome as they provide us with topics to bring to the table. But if there is anything in particular that you would like to know more or you would like us to cover, please let us know. You can ask questions throughout the session at any point. We will pick them up at the end and we'll cover them time permitted. If not, we will then come back to you afterwards. So for the benefit of those that don't know us, Julie, would you like to introduce yourself?
Of course. So good morning, everyone. Hope you are all keeping well. I'm Julie and I'm the founder of Apiary Solutions. And I'm also a chartered fellow of the CIPD and an accredited coach. So for HR, I work with small and medium-sized businesses who are looking to outsource their HR or looking for additional support within their HR teams. The terms of HR I support with is either day-to-day or strategic. And really for me, it's about providing people solutions. And as a leadership and confidence coach, that's also really important to me. So I work with individuals and teams to empower them to achieve their goals, whether that's being the leader that they wish to be, or whether actually it's reducing imposter syndrome that they may experience. For me, it's all about empowering and achieving, and because all of that is a massive part of the performance. And as Cristina said, it's the knowledge piece that's so important. So, Cristina, did you want to introduce yourself as well?
Yes, yeah. So I'm Cristina from CVG Solutions, and I am a multi-award winning GDPR or data protection, whichever you prefer, professional. I primarily work with small and medium-sized businesses, including charities. I love to work with charities, and I really like to see them thrive. I use a hands-on approach, which is also practical with my clients and is proportionate to their size and complexity. I help them to navigate the complexity and intricacy of GDPR, because nothing is black and white. There is always a different shades of grey. And so the educating is a big part of that, because the education then empowers them to make informative decisions, as I truly believe that knowledge is power. And then in turn, these enables them to operate with a high-performing culture, which fuels their business growth. So GDPR becomes part of their USP. So for me, it's all about educating, empowering, and enabling the businesses that I work with.
Fantastic. Thank you, Cristina. And just before we begin, to make everyone aware that this session is being recorded, and it will be used for marketing our products and services on social media and on our website. And of course, if you want to rewatch the session, then please feel free to do so.
Yeah, and also they might also end up on YouTube as well.
Yeah, definitely. So let's kick off. Talk about BCP, or business continuity planning. First question: what is it? It's a good question to start with. What is business continuity, and actually, why does a business need a continuity plan?
Yeah. So basically, a business continuity, it's really the ability of a business to maintain critical business function during a disaster and also after it has occurred, after the disaster has been disbanded. It's a process-driven approach that enables the business to carry on the delivery of the products or services in the event of an unplanned disruption, like cybersecurity or a natural disaster or a pandemic. Well, I think COVID, it's a perfect example of a disaster. And so to achieve this outcome, a plan is put in place that kind of described or establishes the action and steps that are required, to maintain those critical activities during the disaster, but also includes activity on how to reinstate normal operation as quickly and really as smoothly as possible. The other thing to consider is that the business continuity plan needs to cover the entire business. So it's not just the IT or system or just the building. It's, your people, your processes, the assets, and more. So what I tend to do with my clients, I always tend to create a business continuity plan for each department, unless they are really small, because what is critical in one department, say finance, it might not necessarily be critical in operation department. So it's different priorities are in different departments. And I think it helps when putting together this document, this business continuity plan, or the BCP. I always consider the 4 Ps. So that's for people, processes, premises, and providers. So for people, very often we only think of the customers. Actually, the employees are also your people. So it's both of them. They need to be notified of the situation, and how that notification takes place will vary from business to business, from industry to industry. It could be a simple email, or it could be a notice on the website. It might be enough to reach your customer. But it might be that due to the nature of your business or the spread of your customers, you might need to use media like radio, TV, newspaper, or social media. There was an incident very earlier on when the GDPR first came out, where, if I remember correctly, it was the Dixon shops. They had a data breach. And in order to let the customer know, because it was so many, it was thousands of them impacted, they went on the news to tell them. So this is what I mean by having to use media and deciding what is the best communication approach for your business for each of potential disasters. For processes, we also need to think about machinery. So it's not just the internal process, it's also the actual machine as well. So if something breaks, or you're not, or you're prevented from using the machinery, what can you put in place as an alternative solution, even if it's temporarily? Premises, again, we saw them very clearly during the pandemic, where obviously people couldn't access the premises because they were, we were all housebound. So the premises were inaccessible. So obviously the working from home was a quite popular workaround, popular solution. But it's not just the office that we need to think about, is, warehouse. If you're a business that has stock, and therefore you're using warehouses, what happens if you are unable to get to that stock? So perhaps, you want to think of having alternative storage solutions that could be a backup and that you can access at a moment's notice. So say that your warehouse, it's on fire or is being flooded, quickly remove what you can save or salvage and then move it to another warehouse, for example, or somewhere within your office building. Perhaps there is some space there that you could use. So think of different solutions. And then finally, your providers. So these are your suppliers. So again, depending on the disaster, but they might need to be communicated. So it could be, for example, that your phone's lines are down, so they can't get hold of you. So you might want to send them an email to say, look, our phones are down. Please just communicate with us via email for the time being. Or it could be, say, that you are expecting a delivery from a supplier and your building is on fire. So you want to contact them to let them know to either delay the delivery and so reschedule it for later on, or diverge it to another potential address, to your warehouse, say, for example. So all of this needs to be considered when thinking of putting together your business continuity plan. Another thing is not to think of it as a one-off exercise. Once we've done it, sit, excellent, great, it's over there, never to be looked at it again. That's not the point of it at all. It's in fact that you should be testing it, you should be reviewing it on a regular basis, as a minimum annually, but I will recommend more than that. And so basically, and test what you put. Is it still applicable? Because the business changes, the business is dynamic, so things will vary. I would also recommend using a module that is quite popular in Lean methodology. It's called the PDCA. So plan, do, check, and act. So you're planning your recovery, you're then doing it, so you're then implementing the recovery, you're then checking that it is delivery needs to be delivered, that works successfully, and then you're taking lessons learned from it and you're treating what hasn't gone right, and then you are planning it again, and then the cycle goes round and round. And again, going back to the pandemic, it really offers us a great insight, because if we think about it, those businesses that had a BCP, they were the ones that were able to react quickly. And so their business suffered very little impact. While instead those that didn't are the ones perhaps are not with us anymore. A lot of businesses had to shut down. So is also the BCP is also not a standalone document either. It's sort of it links to your risk management. So in your risk register, you should have risks that are associated to natural disasters, fire, flood, hacking, data breaches, system failures, and so on. And so really, if you think about it, the BCP then becomes the plan on how you're going to manage those risks should they become reality, in other words. And yes, depending on where you are, for example, the risk of flood might be a high risk or might be a low risk, but nevertheless, it is possible. The fire, potential fire to your building, again, it might be low, but it's still a possibility that could happen. And so even if it's a low risk, you will still have it on your register, you will still review it and manage it, and you will still have a BCP to address it. Because let's face it, before COVID happened, who thought that a pandemic would become a reality? Nobody did, but yet it did happen. So I think that's the lessons there. Well, what does a BCP looks like in HR?
I was smiling to myself, just thinking we always refer to the pandemic as the kind of the be all, because it falls into so many good examples of nobody's expecting it. Yeah. And actually, so many businesses had to really pivot on very little information that was constantly changing. In terms of BCP and what it looks like in HR, it's about the people for HR. So we've got the succession planning. If there's an eventuality where someone's no longer contactable, or for a period of time they're not, who's going to step in? How does that work? Do they know that? What's the risk to the business? And especially when you think about authorization levels and sign-offs, what is it that person's able to do? Because again, it's those points in times that the business needs to keep on turning. If you're suddenly faced with this unknown period of delay, the business is naturally going to be impacted with that. So it's working out what we can do to be able to put something in place and move on quite quickly. So for the people side of it, it's all situations. Again, the COVID situation. How on earth we suddenly got people working from home? How do we know whether they're high risk, not high risk? The BCPs were completely tested during that period of time. But also we've got business emergencies, we've got political, environmental. So thinking about a couple of things, one of the conversations I was having when the war in Russia and Ukraine started, and actually people were being recalled to home countries to potentially serve, is what does this look like for businesses if we suddenly lose 50% of our staff because they're called up for active duty? What do we do at that point? And again, it's something that you don't necessarily, or I certainly don't necessarily think of on a regular basis. If we think back to 2011, I think this was that period in time. BCPs became, I realised how important they were. We had the killing of Mark Duggan, and that led to multiple riots, unrest within London, within other areas as well. And that saw businesses destroyed through fires. They had courts running 24/7 to try and process the amount of people that were caught up in the unrest. All of that businesses would have to have a BCP for. And at the time, because IT wasn't where IT and tech is these days, I remember most days having to print out lists of contact details of people so that I continually had it with me. Should something happen, I could contact people in the area. And it was actually that point that it really became apparent of how much we needed to be able to reach out to people at a drop of a hat. So I've touched on some of the situations that involve people, but I think for me, Cristina, and I know you mentioned this earlier, what's the difference between a BCP and the disaster recovery plan?
Yeah, before I go into that, I also wanted to add the terrorist attack. terrorist attacks can also impact a business. Think back of 9/11. Think back when, you know, we had the same almost a year later in July in London, we had the terrorist attack. So, and people couldn't get to work because, you know, the underground was disrupted, you know, buses, you know, etc., as well as obviously a lot of people were injured. But in terms of a business, you know, those are the kind of things that you need to think about. And that's why, another reason why having a business continuity plan, it's important. So going back to the difference between a BCP and a disaster recovery. So a BCP, so it's a feature that heavily appears in other disciplines, such as ISO standards. They all have talk about business continuity. Lean Six Sigma, GDPR also has a requirement for a business continuity. So really, I would recommend that all businesses should have one, whether you are big or small, even if you are a micro business, because there is inevitably things that are critical to your business that you need to be aware of. But in essence, the disaster recovery, it's a process that enabled the business to go back to a state of normality. So the two, the BCP and the disaster recovery are very closely linked, but usually the disaster recovery, it's within the BCP. And it describes the technicalities of the recovery, so specific operation or function or sites, so particular action. So in a single BCP, you could have multiple disaster recovery plans, for example. So it sits within the BCP, and it's about returning to business as usual, or BAU, as quickly as possible.
Definitely. I suppose one of the questions that springs to mind is, who's actually responsible for a BCP?
Yeah, that's a very good question. Because again, you know, there's a lot of businesses tend to think of it as, you know, something that you can delegate, or something that you can do once, you know, ticking the box exercise. But as I said earlier, it isn't at all. It's a living document. And so it should not be done by a single individual or a single team. It should be a collective responsibility. You know, again, depending on the size and complexity of your business. But I would say that at least you need one for each department, and then having an overarching one for the whole of the business. And sometimes, you know, those BCP, they might interlock with each other. So it could be that, I don't know, something that happens in finance, a disaster that also triggers, because we're all relying so heavily these days on IT systems, that also triggers the IT BCP. But they run in parallel to then get back to as business as usual. So you should have that linkage between them, where that linkage is, as I said, is not a standalone document or just a one individual responsibility, it's the whole organization responsibility.
Definitely. I think there's so much information that we're sharing with people, and it's not to terrify you. We're not designing it to terrify you. It's more to make you aware, to have that knowledge, to start having those conversations and thinking about it. So if I'm a business owner and I'm listening today and I'm kind of thinking, wow, there's a lot I need to really start thinking about. What are the things that should be included in a BCP?
I think you need to start with the purpose and the objectives of the plan. So the purpose is to identify those critical activities. And then the objective is to identify actions or activities to cope with the disruption. So as a temporary measure to maintain your deliveries of supplies or services, and then how you can go back to business as usual. So normally, as part of, putting together the plan, you also put together what is called an incident response team. So this is several individuals that they are responsible for ensuring that the plan is activated. And ensuring that, stakeholders are communicated in a timely manner, according to the approach of the plan. So the disaster, the BCP needs to contain the contact details of the incident response team, because the idea is when the incident happens, then anyone within the business should be able to then pick up the plan, call someone in the incident response team, and that could happen at any time. So you don't just want the email address, you also want the phone number. Because say the disaster happens at night, well, those people are asleep. So they're not going to read the emails. So you might need to call them in those instances, for example. But they are the one that will coordinate all of the activities. But the other thing to consider, or I think it's a simple exercise, that it boils down really to a handful of questions. So really you should address as I said, what is the organization purpose, core functions and activities? What are the critical products or services that we must continue to deliver so that the disruption to your client is either nothing or very minimal? What are the type of disruption that the organization can experience? So think of anything that could apply to you. What is the likely impact of the disruption? And then what are the consequences to the organization? So those are, in my opinion, the key elements or the key question that, as you're putting together that plan, you should consider.
I think that really helps sort of narrow down that I need to consider everything to actually, I just need to focus on these five areas. So you talked a bit about the incident response team and their role, but why is it so important to have that?
Well, if you think about it, if a disaster were to happen, well, you would have everybody going around like headless chickens. So you want, a team, or depending again on the size of the organization, it might be just a couple of people that pull it all together, that coordinate the activities, that sort of ensures the plan is implemented, that sort of take control and so everybody relaxes a little bit. And so making sure that the internal and external communication are coordinated. If, I don't know, say the business is on fire, you might need to call the insurances. So those are things that needs to happen. And so that it minimizes the impact to the business. So it's just as I said, so that not everybody runs out in panic, but there is someone that can hold on the plan and runs with the plan and coordinates and lead it. And it doesn't necessarily need to be the managing director or the CEO of the organization who is part of the incident response team. It could be other individuals, so long as they have the authority to do so. So, yes. Have you got anything to add to that, Julie, in terms of who could be part of the incident response team?
Yeah, I think as you were saying, I think they just need to be really strong members, subject matter experts in that area, because you want someone to be able to come in, take that control, be able to action, have the right authority to be able to make those decisions. The last thing you need is someone who's having to go and check with someone else to say, can we do this? A lot of the times when I've been involved in the incident response, it's kind of, right, this is what we need to do. I need you to go do this, then come back to me. So that it is that one person taking control to resolve the issue as quickly as possible and limit that impact.
Yes. And have you got any examples that you could share with us of when you needed to rely on a BCP, or was it just a tick in the box exercise?
So, yes, completely. I think from as I said, from Mark Duggan and the civil unrest that happened there, we've talked about COVID, we've talked about the war in Russia and Ukraine. Other areas for me where it's come in very apparent of the need for a BCP is, as you said, during the terrorist attacks. A company that I previously worked for, our offices were opposite Manchester Arena. So that when that occurred and the terrorist attack happened there, it was interesting, because I think I was starting to get phone calls about 4 o'clock in the morning saying, right, we need to action. Someone had picked this up overseas, realised it was business critical, and actually we needed to respond to it. But of course, I was fast asleep and completely unaware. So again, it came in useful having my contact details, being able to contact me at home, be able to say, right, this is something that we need to do. I think for other terrorist attacks, and I think being able to offer that response quickly to employees, to be able to make contact with them, is so pivotal to continuing to have the trust, the respect, the engagement, the fact that actually you can show that you care for your employees rather than just, oh, you were involved, didn't realise you lived near there, or didn't realise you might be involved. All of those things are essential. And actually, on the 7/7 attacks that occurred in London, the British Museum won an award for their response to their BCP, because not only did they contact all of their employees to make sure that they were safe, and if they weren't safe, what could they do to support? They then actually contacted the family members to say, right, we've spoken to become that go-between, and it was absolutely highly commended. And I think one of the challenges we've got, certainly in HR departments, is that it's seen as a tick in the box when we're putting those reports, when we're trying to pull that information together, because why on earth would we need it? And it's that knowledge sharing part across the teams of actually, yeah, we probably don't need it, but when we do, we really do. And it has to happen, and it has to be seamless. So I think it can be seen as a tick in the box. It can be seen as unimportant, but being the one who's in the incident response team, so important and so pivotal. So even getting that message across to your teams, really, really vital.
Yeah. And it's really interesting because, again, when you're talking about, systems, everything is delegated to the IT department. They will think about that, okay? But there was an incident, and we've seen quite a few recently in the public space. NHS and various councils have been victims of cyber attacks. And there was a particular council that a client of mine works with, and they were a victim of, a cyber attack. So they lost access to their data. And again, they just left it, the IT department will think about it, but actually that impacted their suppliers because they couldn't pay them. So they had to issue out communication. They didn't have a strong BCP plan in place, which has meant, delays in payment to their suppliers, loss of services, et cetera, et cetera. So while instead, if they had a BCP plan, they could have had, a manual temporary, they could have activated like a manual temporary process to pay their suppliers so that services could continue and then go back to normal once the recovery took place. So that's, again, another example of why it's so important. And yeah.
So who
should be involved in creating the? Oh, sorry.
You're so keen. So keen.
I know.
I know we've talked about the types of information, but actually, when we're talking about the data, I think it might just be worthwhile to reiterate what kind of data are we including that might be relevant to GDPR in BCPs.
Yes. So, the BCP sometimes might contain personal data. So, for example, if you just think of the incident response team that I mentioned earlier, and you would have their contact details, even if they are the work email address or the personal or the work phone number, these are still personal data because they are directly linked to them, unless it's a mailbox or a switchboard. But if it's a mailbox or a switchboard, then that doesn't fit the purpose for the BCP point of view. So as a minimum, you might have that kind of personal data. But you might also have financial data. So, for example, I did one BCP the other day in collaboration with a client of mine. They are in manufacturing, so they always need to make sure that there is a certain amount of cash flow available to replace stock should the stock be damaged on fire, for example. So the level of financial information, it's included in the BCP. So there might be, attached to the BCP a succession plan, which we talked earlier. So again, you will have name of individuals. You will have, I'm sorry, I got right. Throat this morning, or like you mentioned earlier, Julie, where in your previous role as part of corporate, you would print out the list of employees and their contact details so you could contact them on a daily basis. So those are things that are not necessarily in the BCP plan itself, but they are part of the actions and the activities that are part of the plan, if that makes sense. And so when you do those kind of things, you still, GDPR still applies. So you will still need to be aware, that you still need to put security measures around them. So don't just leave that printed document, all over your desk, for example, that kind of stuff. And do you need to print it? Can you access the information another way that is more secure, et cetera, et cetera? So those are the things that you need to think about. But, personal data is everywhere, really. And so there will always be an element of it in the BC plan, even if it's minimum. So we talked earlier, Julie, a little bit about that when creating a BCP, it should not be done by a single individual. So who should be involved in creating it?
Yeah, so to break it down, essentially everyone needs to be involved at some stage. Now, but we'll break it down layer by layer. So we need to identify those individuals that are the subject matter experts or the SMEs within their area. So that could be the HR manager or head of, or whatever that looks like, the IT lead for their area, and actually working with them to identify what potentially could be the risks, what the response is going to be. When I say that everyone needs to be involved, it would then be down to those individuals to make sure that their teams are aware. Because, of course, if we have a situation that's an emergency, we've got to contact people, we've got to respond quickly, that HR manager is not going to be able to do it all themselves. They're going to be able to have their team help with some of that work, dilute some of the work. Otherwise, it just becomes a bottleneck, and there's no point in that. If you're trying to get to people urgently, you need people to be able to do that and respond quickly. The way I work the BCPs is that the information should always flow down and flow up. So you have someone on a leadership team who is relaying to the rest of the leadership team, the board members, etc., what's going on, when the next update is going to be. And then below that, you've got the leads who are conducting that piece of work and getting their teams to do it. Essentially, when you're designing that BCP, we're just looking for the heads of or the SMEs, because remember, it doesn't necessarily have to be that lead person in a department. It could be a subject matter expert who is, I don't know, well-versed in IT, servers, infrastructure, whatever that may look like. Whereas you've got the head of that department, well, it could be a finance manager who knows nothing about IT. So we really need to identify that SME, and that happens a lot, especially within smaller businesses. So it's really important to get that. And I think when we're thinking about the storing of the BCP, as you said, Cristina, it's somewhere that's accessible. Now, back in 2011, I made a comment earlier that actually it was a printout that I was carrying around of everyone's contact details, which, to think about today, gives me cold shivers of how risky that was. But we didn't have laptops. So yeah, it was a case of we just need to make it work and never let go of that information. And again, it's just making it work, but really being aware of all the risks that you've got. But of course, technology is where it is now. So hopefully many people have the use of the cloud and are able to access that information. But it's really important that we make sure that information's up to date. And as Cristina, you said, make sure that it's checked, it's updated on a regular basis.
Yeah, and I think everyone within the business should be aware that there is a BCP in place. There's no point in having it if nobody knows anything about it. So, you want people to be able to access it. So, if you have an intranet kind of system, then, that's the best place to put it together with all of your policies, for example, that your employees need to access, so that something were to happen, even the receptionist can pick it up and call, the incident response team to action and activate. So it is something that everyone should have access to, and it should be easily accessible. And where do we start if anything goes, if we don't have anything in place?
I mean, that's the grand question, isn't it? Where on earth do you start? We shared so much information today that there's an awful lot to digest. And for me, it's starting to think about who would be on that incident management team, who are the SMEs within the business, so the subject matter experts, and starting to talk to those individuals about what risks they consider might come through, because it's got to be that collaboration effort. There can't be, as we've said all through today, it can't be down to one person to say, right, I'm going to identify all the risks because I've got that perspective on life. There's going to be different risks depending on different specialisms and awareness and roles within the business. So that's where I'd start thinking about it. But then I'd also start, personally, I'd probably drop a line to Cristina to say help. If I wasn't doing that, I would start to research online the kind of information that I would need to think about, and then start to put that in place. A BCP isn't something that you can pull together really, really quickly. It's something that takes a lot of thought, that I think can be quite a challenge. So one of the things that Cristina, I've thought, and did you have anything to add to that?
Yeah, you're right. It is a challenge, but I think that once you've done it, it opens up your eyes to so much more. You think, at least whenever I've been part of it, whether as a consultant or as part of a team when I was working for corporate, you brainstorm together, and that, oh, I didn't know that. Oh, I hadn't thought of that. So it just opens up so much more than just say, okay, yeah, we've done it. That's it, done. And I will also go back to what I mentioned earlier about the sort of the key elements or the key questions, if you want, to address when putting together that plan, is thinking of what is the purpose, the core functions and the activities of your organization. What are your critical products and services that you must deliver no matter what? What is the minimum standard that you have to make sure that your customers are still satisfied, or that at least the impact is minimum? Think of the disruption that your business could face. There might be, depending on, for example, on your geographical location, it might be that flooding is much more of a risk to you or less. Cyber attack, I'm afraid, is everybody's risk, so it should be high on your risk register. So it's all the things that you need to consider. And when you're thinking and you're looking at those disruption, think blue sky. Don't just limit, just look like that. Open your eyes to whatever it could happen, because again, the pandemic is a great example of that. And think of, what are the temporary measures that you could implement to maintain or to minimize the disruption, and what you need to do to then go back to business as usual, BAU. So that's, I suppose, for me, it's my contribution to that. Julie.
Thank you for that. And Cristina, just to let you know that unfortunately you're frozen.
Yes, I see again that my camera is gone off, so I don't know why, but anyway.
Who knows? But Cristina's still with us. That's the most important thing. So in the manufacturing world, if I'm thinking this through and my business is one that's manufacturing, if there's a fire or a flood, is there anything that we can do? Because in my mind, there's very little that we can do.
So in terms of, you're manufacturing, the machine is in your premises, and your premises, are flooded or on fire, so you can't access it. From that perspective, yes, there's very little you can do. But there are other things that you could be doing that should be part of your plan, like, for example, calling your employees or letting your employees know not to come to site because the building is flooded. your suppliers to say don't deliver because the premises are inaccessible. Your insurance, let them know that this is happening so that straight away they can send, or you can start arranging for the repairs to the building following the flood or the fire. It could be put together so the incident response team could then be collecting, all the relevant employees, like you said earlier, and start salvaging as much stock as possible to then move it to another warehouse as part of your backup plan, that it's in your plan. So those are the things that while your machinery are not usable, but other things around it, so you can still have consider that as part of your plan. So there is plenty that you could do. So yeah, I think that just because the machines are not working, it doesn't mean that there's nothing for you to do. There is loads. And when we are thinking about BCP, so business continuity plan, how far in the future should we consider? So, or should we be thinking about, the next, year, 5 years, 10, 20, 30? What do you think?
So for me, and it's an interesting conversation because it's certainly one I've had with an organisation. I think if we're aware of something, we should capture it, because one of the things we were talking about was flooding in the east of England. And whilst I think the Environmental Agency predicted that flooding was going to take place in 2030. Do we notice that down in the BCP? Well, for me, yes, because actually then it's there. It can be reviewed as part of our checks. Has there been any movement on it? Does it still remain a low risk? I think if you're in and Cristina may have said this before, if you're in central England, it may not be such an issue. But I think if you're in coastal areas or lower land, then yeah, I would note it down. You can always increase it or decrease the risk as needed, but at least you've got it on there so that you're continually aware that could be a risk that actually you do need to start thinking about. But what about you, Cristina? What do you think?
I totally agree with you that you need to assess the relevance to your business, but I think for me there is no time limit. If something that could potentially happen to you or to your business, then you should have it in your plan and then adjust the level of risk severity accordingly. And going back to what we were saying earlier, that the business continuity plan, it's a living document. It should be reviewed, it should be amended and updated on a regular basis. That actually is no more true than it is today, thinking of the election that are quickly coming up.
Definitely. So what are the things that you think we need to factor in about the election? Because I know it's forefront of most people's minds.
Yes. Some of your employees could also be part of the local parish councils, so they might have additional duties that they need to do there, and so that takes them away from work. For example, they might not be able to do overtime or other things that you need to think about and factor around it. The other thing, we also have the Euro Olympics and the football, isn't it? Coming up as well. So you've got to think about that as well. People that are going to be throwing in sick leave, higher demand of holidays all at the same time because they all want to watch it. So what can you do to go around it, so that the disruption to the business is minimum. So those are all things that, and I'm sure, Julie, that you must have experienced that in your.
Yes, definitely. From and it's really down to the business as to whether they show sporting events. I think it can be quite interesting in terms of attendance, lateness, sickness, etc. But also, an aside to BCP, it's actually how people behave when the sporting event's on.
Yes.
Within the work environment, but also externally, because they may get caught up in some trouble and that may need some reviewing, let's say.
Yes. Absolutely. And in terms of, is there anything else in terms of the election that you think we should consider?
I think one of the areas that I would consider for the election for businesses is the consideration of employment changes or any legislative changes that are going to impact the bottom line. Now, of course, the parties are in the process of releasing their manifestos or their contracts, as I believe Nigel Farage is calling it. I think that is something that businesses need to be mindful of, and the period of change that we're going to go through should the government change, whatever that may be. There is a risk to the business there, and there may be disruptions to shipping, to political, economical areas that impact the business. So I definitely have it listed on there as a consideration.
Yeah, I agree. Are there any questions that have come through, Julie?
No, not as yet. Not as yet. I think what I would say is if people do have questions, feel free to ask. If we do run out of time, because I appreciate we're close to the top of the hour, reach out, contact us directly. We're more than happy to help.
Absolutely. Was there anything else that you think we've missed, Julie, that we ought to cover before our last 3 minutes run out?
So I would say I think we've covered so many different areas, and it's been really useful to share this much information. Again, appreciate there's an awful lot. So as I say, do reach out if you've got any questions that we can talk through. And remember that the recording, you'll be able to watch it again and for your heart's content, either on YouTube or LinkedIn. Yes. Or any other social media platform.
But I also found interesting our conversation because we are coming from two different angles, from two different perspectives. So while obviously you're much focused on the people side, I'm much more focused because my background, but also what I do, more on the processes. Do you know what I mean? The IT, the system, and also I think the two really complement each other. That the business continuity plan. It needs to be, across the whole organization. It's not just one side, and it's a broader exercise, which hopefully we have sent that message across. So, but again, please do not panic. As Julie said, do reach out to us if you have any questions or if you need any support. So sadly, we've come up to the end of our time together today. We are taking a small break because of the summer holidays. Hopefully the weather will improve. The sun seems to be out today a little bit. But we do have exciting news because we will be back on the 18th of September. And the topic for that will be on security clearance. a lot of businesses, especially if you're working with governments or public bodies, security clearance is a key aspect of how you operate. The link for the sessions on the 18th of September will go out in the next few days or maybe a week or so. So please keep an eye out for that. Reach out to us if you have any further questions or any thoughts that come back to you after this. And we will come back to you as soon as possible. And once again, if there is anything that you would like us to cover, please do let us know. We will be happy to add it to our list of topics. So thank you again for joining us today. Having fantastic holidays during the summer. Enjoy the sun when it decides to come out. And see you all in September. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Take care. Bye.